Thanks for joining us today at BIB Today, the daily business podcast from the Newsroom of Business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. Vancity, the Vancouver City Savings Credit Union, started 75 years ago this year with 14 members. It has grown and grown and grown into a financial powerhouse in the province with more than $500 million in revenue, more than 2,600 employees. And of course, it's a bit of a different financial institution in that it expends enormous energy in community works in association with, in some cases, leading social change. So its public-facing leadership has to embody and exemplify that in ways that many other institutions just don't and need not. Its most recent CEO, Tamara Vrooman, earned international credit for advancing the profile and the purpose of Vancity, and she left to take on a giant challenge in managing our airport, YVR, and left significant shoes to fill. Her successor was hiding in plain sight. Christine Bergeron has been within Vancity in senior executive roles now for 9 years, most recently as its Chief Member Services Officer, and she's been chosen for the top job in recent weeks with no small task of stewardship in a pandemic, of course, that has cost enormous personal financial uncertainty in many quarters across the province. Let's get some early thoughts from her today on the path ahead. Good to see you.
You too. Thanks.
Yeah, let's look. What do you think are the personal qualities that a leader has to have at a place like Vancity? That's a way of me asking you. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the personal qualities, absolutely. Vancity is quite a unique organization, and so an understanding and really a bit of a different way of thinking about prosperity from that lens of a financial institution, right, of people and planet and profit. And so there is an element of understanding the communities that we serve and thinking differently about that, in addition to, of course, needing to deeply understand finance and everything that goes with that. And then I would maybe add that certainly the employees and the team here at Vancity are also quite unique in terms of their passion for the work. And so I think like many organizations, especially over the last little while, really having deep empathy and really thinking about all of the mental health challenges that the teams are having and being able to lead through that is difficult, but also really important for the entire organization.
Yeah, I think when you talk to people who work at Vancity, you get an appreciation for how they were drawn to the place right at the beginning, and how they wanted to move their careers there for their purpose and all that. So knowing that, is there a particular Vancity approach to, say, decision making or problem solving that you think differs a bit from, say, other financial institutions?
I mean, certainly we do take a unique approach in that we really think about people at the center and putting people first in terms of decision making. I haven't worked directly in other financial institutions, so I won't speak to that comparison. My background has been more from venture capital and working in public markets, and then into a financial institution. And so it has been really about melding again sort of that perspective of risk and return, understanding the rates and how you'll think about profit in the same sentence and in the same framework as what effects are this business going to have on individuals, on the community, and on the environment. So certainly we do put people in the center, and sometimes people talk about that, and almost everybody will say that they do that, but then how do you actually think through that in a different lens? And it is thinking about, for example, do you think differently about how long the payments could come back as a financial institution, right? Do you think differently about the rates that you might offer a group that typically would not have access to capital? So we do take a different approach, and I think it's largely because we're not focused on maximizing profit. We're really focused on trying to meld all three together.
Yeah, these are different paths that Vancity takes to achieve, though, the same objective, right? I mean, you're not looking to lose money. You're not looking to be financially deficient. You have a very sturdy, sustainable operation. And yet, to some degree, you still have a bit of a sales job to do in the wider world, that this is a way to succeed. Do you think the pandemic has changed a little bit of that conventional old style financial institution thinking, and brought people maybe more toward Vancity's way?
I think that certainly the pandemic has highlighted, right, a lot of the inequality and the inequities that we largely, have known exist in community and in society. So I do think that highlighted the point. I think there were several elements along the way as well that have made people aware of the fact that, the climate crisis is also here, hasn't actually gone away during the pandemic. And I think people are understanding that will also have very large economic impacts if we don't really start creating pathways, through it to the other side of what a cleaner economy will look like. We've certainly seen those trends over the last 9 to 12 months, whether that's from an investment perspective and the flow of money that's been going into socially responsible investments. I mean, that has really increased over the last little while. And same in terms of how financial institutions are trying to now think differently about perhaps groups that don't typically have the same access to capital that others do. So we are seeing that shift, and I think it's been highlighted. I think that individuals, consumers, for us members, are asking for more of that, right? They are asking for companies to be held to account on how they're going to improve these inequalities that we're seeing.
Do you think then that are the members of Vancity, would you say, activists? And I mean that in a good way. Are they looking for their institution to be more than a place where they move their money through and have their savings and get their paychecks directly deposited, but they're looking for your financial clout to form a style of leadership in our society?
Of course, we have many different types of members, and absolutely we do, as a financial institution, need to provide products and services and ensure that their financial needs are met, right? So, we're very aware of that, and that's always part of our work. And I do think that many of our members expect more from us. Yes, right? They do expect us, because we have, and we will continue to do so, go into community, understand the gaps that are really there, and they know that we will do what we can, as much as we can. Sometimes we do it very successfully and sometimes less so, but to provide products and services for those gaps. We tried to do that when COVID first hit. Government was doing their best at putting in a lot of new programs. But in doing so, we were hearing directly from members in the community that there were gaps. Not everyone was getting caught in these programs, and some people were really unclear as to how their livelihood would be maintained right in the months ahead. And so we did look to create new products that would help a business pivot, as an example, where they didn't have to pay us, 6 months in terms of the interest in order to give them time to retool and rethink it. We created another one that was really about bridging, for those members who were maybe more solopreneurs or had their own, like physios and those others who couldn't quite, they weren't being captured by these government programs early on. Government has shifted over time, and they've really captured more of those individuals. But early on, it was trying to figure out what else do they need, right? We had heard from members that they couldn't, government programs weren't in all the languages that they needed in order to be able to easily access the programs. So we worked with others in a partnership to help translate more of those programs. So again, just constantly trying to understand, how do we help level the playing field for access, and what gaps are there? So our members do want us to be doing that. We hear from them all the time on that. So they want us to be thinking about that, and then they want us to be thinking about the long-term sustainability of our community. And so we've, as we have a track record of being very clear that the environment is super important. And our recent work has been hearing again from members that they want us to continue to do more. So for us, it's really around with climate, it's also the effect of climate on people. And so we put out our new commitments, again, in part from hearing from membership that they want us to continue to do more.
So it's very interesting that in what has been, for some people, one of the most arduous periods that anyone can recall, that your membership still is signaling to you to not take your eyes off the longer term in this one. Get us through this, but don't drop the ball on the longer term things that we have directed the institution to muster and all of that. Any surprise in that for you?
Not really a surprise. I think, again, we have a wide variety of members, and absolutely some, have been hit very, very hard by COVID, and they're really focused on getting through the day-to-day, right? So we're really clear about, making sure that we're there for them, for those elements, like making sure we're doing deferrals and cutting fees. And there's a lot of our members who, luckily are not feeling hit that way as well, right? And so they have perhaps more of the luxury of continuing to think longer term. And our role is to think about both ends of those spectrum, right? That spectrum, and think about how do we serve this membership and how do we think long term on the one hand, while also helping people day to day. So in a way, it does make it harder, but we really believe that is ultimately our role, right? As a financial institution, we're aggregating all of that and doing our best to ensure the long term while really being there day to day.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit of a question about the process, your ascension into this role, because you've had the role in an interim way for a number of months when Tamara Bruman announced that she was going, and you took it on. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how that might have helped in two ways. One, of course, helped the organization understand that you were its logical next leader, but also maybe helped you understand whether, in fact, this is really what you wanted.
Well, certainly there's pieces that would perhaps help, and then of course it's difficult to come into an interim role in the middle of a pandemic. After a CEO who'd been here for many, many years, right, who many have known. So certainly I was very clear that I was not looking to fill anyone's shoes. My experience, if you try to fill someone else's shoes, you will trip. So that is certainly not the intention. But yes, I think that having been previously leading our lines of business, as well as our key impact files, so our work in climate, our work on reconciliation, there was, I think, good stability for the organization when I stepped into the interim role, right? I didn't need to learn the organization again. And especially given that portfolio, they're very core elements of our work. So I think that that certainly helped the organization. And yes, of course, being in it helped you understand whether you want to continue or not. And I would say as well that we have a really strong team, executive team, but it flows all the way through. And so certainly, you can have different outcomes in a transition. And I would, definitely give kudos to the whole team for really ensuring that the organization felt that we were collectively, moving in the same direction.
Yeah. There's never any disparagement on previous leadership, but every new leader tries to put some kind of new stamps on an organization that really flow from that person's own qualities and capabilities and priorities. In the early going, have you identified what areas you think might be some additional focus, some other initiatives that Vancity might want to try here?
Yeah, I think, when I took on the interim, certainly we continued our work, and that was to ensure, a few elements around our employee experience, as well as being really clear about what a true, responsible recovery would look like. And so that's certainly been our work over the last 6 or 7 months. And I think going forward, it's not so much about a stamp as really listening in to members and employees on how we need to be moving forward. We do have many elements to Vancity. We have in the sense of like subsidiaries and other pieces that all come together into our group effectively, right, the family. And I do think that we'll be able to push on that work more and hopefully see some good movement in the next few years. And then, of course, our climate commitments aren't necessarily a new stamp because it's a continuation of our work to some extent, but it is sort of the next phase of what we want to be doing. It's going to be a lot of work. You know, we're aiming to get our mortgage portfolio to net zero by 2040. You know, we're working hard to get the data to show that. And again, some of that's a continuation, but we put out our commitments just a few weeks ago. And so it is kind of that path forward, certainly with respect to climate, the effects of climate on people, and ensuring that no one's left behind as we transition to a clean economy.
Yeah. Let us into the tent a little bit. What was your predecessor's best bit of advice for you?
Oh, her best bit of advice would be that to lean in, not where you don't know the information, but where the leadership is needed. So I've taken on different portfolios, and as someone who wants to know everything, you know, many of us want to go and dig really hard in the one area you don't know, but actually, you know, instead think about where the leadership is needed.
I better think about doing that. Yeah. Now, last kind of area, which is more of a general view of how we're coping economically in the pandemic. Are there elements that you think governments themselves need to examine here in the short period ahead as we start to wean ourselves from things like wage subsidies and income supports? You know, is there an emerging idea that you think needs to take some hold in order that we build back better, as they say?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's so. Of course, there's across Canada, and then there's BC, where you know we have different pockets, right, of economic activity, and BC's been doing well. Our focus has largely been, as you know, on the real economy and small and medium-sized businesses here. And of course, we, you know, we've seen that many of them are continuing to do okay, but we are watching that, right? We've done our own research reports that highlight, you know, the drop in foot traffic, that highlight the drop in revenue. And so we are concerned as to how many of them will be able to get through, you know, these next months until we have mass vaccination. So that's one of our key areas of focus. And so to the question on government support, certainly what we've heard from small business owners, as an example, is not necessarily more lending options, right, in terms of like the debt that they need to take on. But actually what they said was, you know, could we think of incentives or other ways to encourage local individuals to shop local? And how can you do that? And how else do you think differently about some of these elements that come into place, as an example? And then I think broadly in terms of, you know, building back better and thinking about building back differently, perhaps, is certainly incentives and investment and some different legislative support for sectors that are needing to transition to the low carbon economy. There are many groups, you know, starting this work, and there's going to be a lot more needed to be done on pathways. But I do think the government, and they are starting to lean in there for sure, can probably do more there as well. I mean, there's certainly other ways to also think, right, about the kinds of supports in place for those whose jobs are going to be impacted. And I think, you know, the same way they've been impacted through COVID, they'll likely also be impacted in a transition, you know, if their sector or if their work starts to really shift, they need either different skills or possibly that sector actually changes completely. We're going to be needing to think about pathways, and government is certainly going to play a role there.
Yeah. So you're now in a senior financial institutional executive position. And with that, I think obviously comes a certain conferred responsibility to discuss the broader economy at all times. And I wonder if I can get a bit of an early gauge from you about whether we worried too much in the past about things like deficits and debt, and whether now we have to relent on that and reboot an awful lot of our systems in the economy, and do so at a bit of a cost, to straighten things away a lot better. Do you have a take on something like that?
I think what I would say is that, a lot of the programs that were put in place that, have now contributed to the debt, I think at the time it was very unclear, right, how COVID was going to affect organizations and companies. So in retrospect, of course, there's more perspective on that. But they were sort of broad strokes, and we actually did some of that ourselves on a microcosm basis of like a broader stroke of just dropping fees for everyone, right? Because we weren't in a position to really say, we'll drop it simply here. We didn't know how that was going to unfold. So it's sort of a similar path. And I think that what certainly is needed going forward are targeted programs to ensure that the money is going to where it's needed. And certainly as a broader statement, myself as a taxpayer and others as consumers, that seems to, I don't think anyone would argue with that. But I think when you look back, that was very difficult to do right out of the gate. And so it is going to be a balance, right? We do have a lot of that debt in place now. And I think going forward, it just needs to make sure it's being targeted to the right sectors.
Do you think we're headed toward a kind of a universal income program in this country?
I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be where things land. I think we've seen certainly good examples, and we've seen a lot of the pros and cons. I'm certainly not the expert on it, so I don't expect that would necessarily be something that unfolds in the near term.
Yeah, I think I ask almost every executive in the pandemic the same question, and it's a personal one. But how do you take care of yourself during times like this? What's your self-care strategy?
I tend to be simple on the one hand, but then of course it's hard to do it. For me, it's really fresh air and exercise, and balancing that with family time. So we try to do both together, whether that's bike riding and running and the like. So for me, if I can get fresh air and exercise, I'm usually pretty good.
Yeah.
Probably luckily, I suppose that I'm able to do that and have been able to carve out time.
Well, if you're doing ground level running and cycling, it's actually not been a bad winter so far. Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I want to thank you for your time today. It's been really good to get some early thoughts from you, and I hope we keep the dialogue going as time goes on here to understand a little bit about where you're directing the organization and how, in some ways, it's bound to change you as well as an executive the longer you're in it. But Christine, thanks for your time today.
Thanks very much.
Christine Bergeron is the new president and CEO at Vancity. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief at Business in Vancouver. Thanks for watching today.